Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.
So really weird stuff going on. Joining us now, we have council member from Fayetteville, Mr. John Latour is with us. John, welcome to the Paul Harrell program. How are you?
Good afternoon, Paul Harrell. Glad to join you and your listeners and be glad to discuss what I know of these facts.
Yeah. I mean, did I get anything wrong there? What's going on?
Well, all I would add to it is these are all, most of these facts that you recited are alleged facts in the lawsuit by Stephen H.K. versus Alan Long. And you had the date right. It was filed October 31st, 2017 at 11:37 a.m. So this became public knowledge on that date, October 31st. Of course, it wasn't made public from the city until the Monday before Thanksgiving, which was November 20th, some 20 days later. And I think timing was taken into consideration by those in the powers that be in the city of Fayetteville.
Oh,
they wanted it done that way so most people would be out of town during Thanksgiving week or not paying attention. You know, you've got guests coming in, you're cooking the turkey, blah, blah, blah. All sorts of things going on during that busy week, and they won't be paying attention very closely to political things that are happening.
Mm-hmm. So there's also a kind of a bigger story here. Well, more important to me, obviously, I think, we found out that the old city councilman, wasn't Alan Long. He didn't actually live in the ward he was representing. But this was an appointed position, and yet he still had something like, 3 years to finish out his term. Is that correct?
3 years and 1 month and a few days, so it's over 3 years. I could go along with an appointment if it was just 6 months remaining in an unexpired term or even up to a year. But 3 years will really put Kyle Smith in a position of incumbency when he seeks re-election in 3 years and a month from now. And that would give him an unfair advantage, I think.
So why not do an election? Why not do a special election or in the next general election? Why not set a and I know you voted when it came time to appoint. The council members voted, and you voted against this decision.
That's correct. Justin Tennant and I were the two no votes on the appointment process, and everyone else, along with the mayor, voted to appoint Kyle Smith. Kyle led the way in a group called For Fayetteville, which was for extending special rights to the homosexual community in Fayetteville. I have nothing against anyone in Fayetteville. I love everybody. I like all peoples, no matter what your political stripe, no matter what any kind of other stripe you have. I believe we should all love our fellow man. It's just I don't want to see one group privileged over at the expense of other groups. I think you get into shaky ground constitutionally when you do that.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the way I understand it in Fayetteville, if you run for this ward, only those people in the ward can vote for you. And so if that's the case, then you have all these other council members who are from different wards making the decision for Ward 4 in this case in Fayetteville for the next 3 years.
Exactly. All the rest of us on city council went through campaigns. We incurred expenses. We put in long hours going door to door, getting our vote out. And Mr. Smith came in with just 5 votes, and all from people who live in other wards. So it seems unfair to me, but I'm the minority on city council, so I can verbalize my opposition, but I cannot carry a vote in that line.
Yeah, and that I remember that Fayetteville ordinance. I mean, it seems like they wanted. I mean, it seems like you had maybe somebody who's on the left occupying that seat. They wanted to make sure somebody on the left occupies that seat again. And you talk about that Fayetteville First ordinance. I mean, that was something that was, not about equal protection under the law like they claimed. It actually was very anti, First Amendment conscience protection, religious liberty protections. I mean, right? I mean, did you fight that ordinance when it was all the rage? I mean, it was making headlines all across the state.
Well, I was the opposition to that ordinance.
Yeah.
And there's a YouTube video with me explaining my position. If I'm a member of the LGBTQ community and I choose to live out what I believe, under that ordinance, I'm protected. if I'm a member of the community that believes in traditional marriage and I choose to live out what I believe, under that ordinance, I'm subject to prosecution. So I didn't think it was really a fair ordinance. It favored one group at the expense of another group. As long as that is the case, I could not support it.
Yeah.
You know, we could remedy some of that by making the exception to prosecution for people who held a sincere, good faith belief in a certain form of morality.
Yeah.
You know,
but then you're going to have some judge that makes the decision on what that definition is. You know, I just think it's you know, the first. I mean, religious freedom and conscience has been a protected group, you know, since 1789 in this country. It's very clear. It's in the First Amendment, and you know, when people try to go against the First Amendment, it's just, I don't know, red flags, you know, go up everywhere. We're talking with John Latour. He's a Fayetteville Council member. Now, John, you sound like a limited government guy. Would I be describing you as that?
You are correct. I'm for limited government. As government grows, liberty recedes. I love liberty, and I will fight to protect liberty at every turn. That means I have to fight for limited government. I'm not an anarchist. I don't want no government. I want government, but I want it restrained and limited.
So, you got elected to city council. I mean, are you maybe one of the few or the only conservatives on the council? I mean, Fayetteville's a pretty progressive town, as they would call themselves.
Yes, Fayetteville is very progressive, and I say that's a code word for liberalism.
Yes.
They believe that big government is the way to go. I believe that limited government is the way to go. We were in the middle of fighting against this so-called civil rights ordinance when my election came about in 2014. And I think that was a really hot-button issue for a lot of people in Ward 4, and it was a field of 6, and we were able to win that seat without a runoff election. Many people were surprised, including myself. But that's the way it worked, and here I am. And I swim in a sea of liberalism, but I will not give up my conservative roots. I like to describe myself as a statesman, not a politician. A politician sways in the wind, puts his finger up, his political finger, see which way the wind is blowing, so he knows which way to march. I describe myself as a statesman who lives and dies on his principles, much like Ronald Reagan did.
Absolutely, and I agree with that. Let me ask you about this tweet. Joe, can you throw this tweet up on the screen here? This was from the city of Fayetteville. Tell me if this is the description. Now, this is back to the meat and potatoes of this councilman, you know, Long and getting replaced by Councilman Smith now. It says, Council Member Latour asked Mr. Smith if he knew that former Council Member Alan Long used Mr. Smith's address as his own. Kyle Smith's reply was, yes. Mr. Smith asked the relevancy of the question. Council Member Latour accused Mr. Smith of conspiracy with former Alderman Long. Can you expand on that? Is that accurate? I mean, and was there really knowledge? I mean, that's kind of sound like, you know, election fraud there.
Well, it sounds like election fraud to me, too, and could be. Now, I'm surmising some things, and I'm assuming some things. We would have to put Mr. Smith and Mr. Long on a witness stand to get them under oath to really know what's going on here. But the plaintiff in the lawsuit against Mr. Long, Mr. K, might also shed some light as to where Mr. Long was actually living at the time. In this lawsuit, Mr. K alleges that Mr. Long had moved to Chicago sometime in July of this year, in which case, if when I asked the question of Mr. Smith, you know, were you aware that Mr. Long was using your address as his official Ward 4 address? Mr. Smith would be aware then that Mr. Long was not actually living there, and if he consented to help Mr. Long deceive Ward 4, then any kind, you know, conspiracy, a legal conspiracy or a criminal conspiracy is defined as when two or more people agree to break a law. That's a simplistic definition, I agree, but it's basically the essence of what conspiracy is. So if the two of them agreed to, you let Alan use that address, and Mr. Smith knew that Mr. Alan was not living there, then that would, in my mind, be a conspiracy.
Yeah, it's very strange. I mean, it's
right.
very, and it's also strange that all of this comes out right before Thanksgiving. And like you said, they knew on October 30th that this was now public knowledge, but they wait and they do something about it right before the holidays. It's very.
I've learned in the political realm, Paul, that nothing happens by coincidence. Everything is planned and strategic. So when something comes out just before Thanksgiving, there's a reason for that coming out at that time.
Yeah, for sure. There really is. So I talked to you a little bit before you came on the program. We talked a little bit about some of the national issues, and just the issues that are facing the country. And so I got a question for you, because I like to ask this, especially of folks who are in any form of politics, at the smallest local level all the way up. When you have people who are campaigning one way, specifically, I know in different cities it can be more liberal, but let's just talk about generally Arkansans issue by issue are very conservative people, in my opinion. A limited government, less taxes, less regulation. When you have a bunch of Republicans, and the Republicans have taken control over Arkansas, much like they took control over the House in D.C., and then the Senate, and then the presidency, and they campaign on very popular ideas, and then it's like they come up with excuses to not do them, and in some cases do the opposite and grow the size of government. What are we the people supposed to do when that kind of stuff happens, and they try to mask what they're doing sometimes as conservative, when in reality it's the complete opposite of what they campaigned on? Do you have any suggestions?
Vote, baby, vote. Vote, baby, vote. We've got to get people out. We have Democrats masquerading as Republicans. I'm trying to avoid Republican-Democrat designations because they're deceptive. I would show it as actual conservative Republicans versus establishment Republicans and Democrats. In my mind, establishment Republicans and Democrats want basically the same thing. And a lot of times they couple that with having their cake and eating it too. What I mean by that is they can campaign on the conservative issues. They say, I'm pro-life, I'm pro this or I'm pro that, I'm pro small government, I'm pro big tax cuts, blah, blah, blah. They get up there. Well, to illustrate on a national level, how many times did the Republicans in the House and the Senate vote to repeal Obamacare? And they voted each time as long as they knew Obama was in the White House and he'd veto it.
Yep.
Now, when we finally have a president in Donald Trump who will sign the revocation of Obamacare, it can't pass the Senate. That shows their true colors. And we need to not be naive. I'm sick and tired of being treated like a patsy. Oh, nice little Republican John Latour, vote for us, get us in the office. We get him into office, and again, just like the last 20 years, nothing changes. It is time to drain the swamp, and let's start in the Republican Party. At least Democrats are honest. They tell us who they are. Republicans, many of these establishment Republicans, are masquerading themselves as Republicans.
Yeah.
They're not truly Republicans, and they're tarnishing the Republican brand.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you just said. It's very, very well said. As a matter of fact, at the top of the hour, I want to talk about how we disagree with people in our own movement, and why it becomes very contentious. Why it's hard to criticize. We're criticizing the establishment, and their reaction is one that they're combating the base of their party. And I want to expand on that because I've thought about it, and it's actually very simple. I thought about it, but that's why it's getting contentious here in Arkansas, at least, when I, or let's say, Conduit for Action or anybody else points out what the establishment in Arkansas is doing. They don't admit to it. They don't admit that what they're doing is the opposite of what they campaign on. Instead, they try to mask it by claiming it's something that it isn't. And that's where the contention is, because we can't roll over and just say, yeah, they're right. What they're doing is just what Ronald Reagan would do when it's growing government. And that's the problem that we're having right now. John Latour, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program, and I'd love to have you on again soon, and we can talk more.
Paul, anytime. Glad to share my views and what we need to do to save our state. And actually, I would expand that notion to actually, and I don't think this is being melodramatic. I don't think it's over-dramatizing. I think the very future of our republic hangs in the balance. We've got to rein in government. We've got to stop spending our children's future. We're incurring debt upon debt. We need to get out of that mode of operation, and let's start reining in the size of government. I tell people if I were president, there'd be a lot of unemployed bureaucrats in Washington. I'd probably start with the Department of Education.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That should be in the states, not in Washington D.C.
I completely agree. John Latour.
I could take most of the federal agencies and go down the list, but we won't do that now.
All right. Well, hey, let's do that some other time. I would really enjoy that. John, I appreciate it. It's been nice to meet you.
Thanks, Paul.
All righty.
Sure thing.
Folks, we got to
Paul Harrell, weekdays from 4 to 6. Learn more at paulharrell.com.